Picture this. You're standing in one of the most remote places on Earth, where polar bears outnumber humans, where the sun doesn't set for 4 months straight, and where something extraordinary lies buried deep within a frozen mountain. What you're about to discover might just be the most important building humanity has ever constructed, and most people have never even heard of it. What if I told you that right now, as you're watching this video, there's a vault containing over 1 million seeds from every corner of our planet, sitting in perpetual frozen silence, waiting. Not waiting for us to visit, but waiting for the world to potentially end. Welcome to the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. Some call it the Doomsday Vault, others call it humanity's backup plan. But here's what's really fascinating, and slightly unsettling, about this place: it was never meant to be opened unless something goes catastrophically wrong with our world. Now, before we dive into this rabbit hole together, I want you to think about something. Every single meal you've ever eaten, every fruit you've tasted, every grain of rice, every slice of bread, all of it traces back to seeds that humans have been carefully selecting and preserving for thousands of years. But what happens when that chain breaks? What happens when climate change, war, or disease wipes out entire crop varieties forever? That's exactly what happened in Syria. In 2015, as civil war raged across the country, researchers made an unprecedented request to the Svalbard Vault. For the first time in its history, they needed to make a withdrawal. The International Center for Agricultural Research in the dry areas had lost its seed collection. Varieties of wheat, barley, and legumes that had been cultivated for millennia were suddenly gone. The backup in Norway wasn't just theoretical anymore, it was literally saving agricultural heritage from extinction. But let's back up and talk about how this incredible place even came to exist, because the story is way more complex and controversial than you might think. The vault sits on Spitsbergen Island, part of the Svalbard archipelago, about 800 miles from the North Pole. The location isn't random, it's strategic. Svalbard is governed by a unique international treaty that makes it politically neutral territory. Plus, the permafrost here is so reliable that even if all power failed, the seeds would stay frozen for potentially thousands of years. The vault is built 390 feet into the mountainside and sits 430 feet above sea level, high enough that even if all polar ice melted, it would remain dry. The Norwegian government, along with the Crop Trust and the Nordic Genetic Resource Center, officially opened this facility in 2008. It can hold up to 4.5 million seed varieties, with each variety represented by an average of 500 seeds. Think about that for a moment. We're talking about the genetic blueprint for feeding potentially 9 billion people. But here's where things get interesting and honestly a bit unsettling. Who decides what gets preserved? And more importantly, who decides what doesn't? The vault primarily stores duplicates of seeds from gene banks around the world. Countries and institutions can deposit seeds for free, but, and this is crucial, they retain ownership. The vault is essentially a safety deposit box, not a public resource. So while it's often called humanity's backup, the reality is more complicated. Some critics argue that this system actually reinforces existing inequalities in global agriculture. The seeds being preserved are largely from established research institutions and wealthy nations, while indigenous varieties from small-scale farmers, often the most genetically diverse and climate-adapted, might not make it into the vault at all. It's a sobering thought. Are we preserving the crops that agribusiness wants to preserve, or the crops humanity actually needs to survive? Dr. Vandana Shiva, a prominent food sovereignty activist, has called seed vaults like Svalbard imperialist, arguing they allow corporations to control genetic resources while appearing to protect them. On the other hand, researchers like Dr. Marie Hage, former executive director of the Crop Trust, argue that without centralized preservation, we're gambling with food security for billions of people. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. The vault has already proven its worth, not just with the Syria withdrawal, but as a powerful symbol of international cooperation on global challenges. When you look at the list of depositors, you'll find countries that can barely agree on anything else working together: North Korea and South Korea, India and Pakistan, Israel and Palestine. Seeds, it seems, transcend politics in ways that almost nothing else can. But there's another layer to this story that's absolutely fascinating from a psychological perspective. The mere existence of the vault changes how we think about risk and security. Behavioral economists call this moral hazard. When having insurance makes you more likely to take risks, does knowing we have a backup make us less careful about protecting crop diversity in the real world? Consider this. We're living through what scientists call the sixth mass extinction. We've lost about 90% of crop varieties that existed 100 years ago. Monoculture farming, Growing vast fields of genetically identical crops has made our food system incredibly efficient, but also incredibly vulnerable. The 1970 corn blight wiped out 15% of the U.S. corn crop because most varieties shared the same genetic vulnerability. The Irish potato famine happened because people depended too heavily on a single potato variety. So is the Svalbard Vault our salvation or a band-aid on a much bigger problem? Here's what really keeps me up at night thinking about this place. What scenarios are we actually preparing for? Climate change, obviously. Rising temperatures and changing precipitation patterns will force us to develop new crop varieties adapted to new conditions. Nuclear war is another possibility the vault was designed to survive. But what about bioterrorism targeting crops? Or solar flares disrupting our electrical grid and refrigeration systems worldwide? The vault's designers thought about scenarios that sound like science fiction. The facility can withstand earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and even nuclear strikes. The entrance tunnel is designed to stay dry even if sea levels rise dramatically. But here's the really wild part: the seeds don't just represent our past agricultural heritage. They're raw material for genetic engineering and crop breeding that could feed people in ways we can't even imagine yet. Scientists are already using preserved seeds to identify genes for drought resistance, salt tolerance, and enhanced nutrition. Some of the varieties sitting in that frozen mountain right now might hold the key to crops that can grow in Martian soil or underwater as sea levels rise. We're not just preserving the past, we're investing in futures we can't even envision. But maybe the most profound thing about the Svalbard Vault isn't what it protects, it's what it represents. In a world that often feels divided and hopeless, here's this quiet testament to human cooperation and long-term thinking. Every seed in that vault represents someone, somewhere, who cared enough about the future to preserve a piece of the past. Think about the farmers who first selected those seeds, generation after generation, choosing the best plants, saving seeds through wars and famines and social upheavals. Think about the researchers who collected them, often traveling to remote villages and building relationships with communities who had maintained these varieties for centuries. Think about the international negotiations and funding that made this vault possible. In a way, every seed in that mountain is a love letter to the future. A message that says, we don't know what challenges you'll face, but we've given you the tools to feed yourselves. It's probably one of the most hopeful things humans have ever built, even though it exists to prepare for our darkest scenarios. But here's the question that haunts me: is it enough? The vault can preserve genetic material, but it can't preserve the knowledge of how to grow these crops, the cultural practices around them, or the ecosystems they evolved in. Seeds without the wisdom to use them are just seeds. So what do you think? Is the Svalbard Vault humanity's greatest insurance policy, or are we putting too much faith in technological solutions to problems that might require deeper changes in how we live and eat? And here's an even bigger question: if you could put one thing in a vault to preserve for future generations, not just seeds, but any kind of knowledge or culture, what would it be? The next time you eat something, anything, take a moment to think about the incredible chain of human decisions and natural selection that brought that food to your plate. And remember that somewhere in a frozen mountain near the North Pole, samples of that genetic heritage are waiting, just in case we ever need to start over. What we do with that backup plan, well, that's up to all of us. Because ultimately, the Svalbard Vault isn't really about seeds. It's about hope. And in a world that sometimes feels like it's running out of both time and options, maybe that's the most valuable thing we can preserve.